All right, what's up, you geeks, and Merry Christmas, you filthy animals. Welcome back to the SG Drive-In, covering this time around the Christmas classics. This time, we are hitting on one of the quintessential Christmas classics. But before we get to all that, I could not do this by myself. So I am joined with the single best mustache in the game. We got Herbie on the drive-in this time. What's good, man?
Nothing much. We're getting really close to Christmas. It's a good time to watch a Christmas movie.
Yeah, I kicked off my my Christmas movie extravaganza this year with Batman Returns, but this is next up on the docket for me. So as we get started, I'm always curious to know, what is your exposure to Charlie Brown Christmas? What's your history with this movie?
So I remember watching it as a kid. Then I haven't watched it in a really long time. I watched it again earlier today. And I will tell you, I was surprised at how short it is. It's only 30 minutes long. It's like a half-hour TV segment.
Yeah, I am of the vintage that I remember watching this on TV as a kid. And I feel like when I watched it as an adult, I remembered this movie being like at least double the length. And watching it, I'm like, this is, I wonder if this is just that, like, all of the commercials are cut out, and so now it's just like super condensed. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that, or we just watched it so much as a kid that like you see it 2 or 3 times and it's like, oh, because I do remember as a kid, my dad would always like flip channels during the commercials, so you never really saw a whole movie at the time on the TV.
Yeah. So this is one of those growing up that it was around, and so you watched it, but this was definitely not my favorite of the Christmas specials. I was more of a Rankin Bass kind of guy growing up, and so for me, it's kind of funny to me sitting here now talking about this movie, because this has so become one of my go-tos. You know what I mean? Like, this is, for me, on so many levels, it vibes with my perspective on the holiday. It vibes with my sense of humor, towards the holiday. It's almost like tongue-in-cheek, a little satirical, if you will, towards the holiday, which I 100% am. And it's a little cliche, I'll admit, coming from a pastor, but to have this movie give the framework that it does, juxtaposing cultural Christmas with the real significance of the holiday, exactly spot on for me.
Yeah, you mentioned this cliche, but keep in mind it was from the 60s. So
yeah,
things that are cliche now weren't entirely cliche back then. Things had to start somehow. Yeah.
It's funny though, because this is, you think about now in retrospect, right? You think of the Charlie Brown holiday specials, and arguably this is like the most famous one. You could make an argument for The Great Pumpkin being number one, but even if it is number one, I would say that this is still a strong number two personally. But this almost didn't get created. It wasn't until Coca-Cola, of all people, stepped in and showed interest in this getting made that networks even wanted to see this become a thing.
Yeah, I'm going to say it's probably like the most iconic, and for no other reason alone, it's going to be for the Charlie Brown Christmas tree. The little old Christmas tree that nobody would ever pick as a Christmas tree. Like, that's a bigger icon than the Great Pumpkin or even the Thanksgiving special. It it really is the thing that people are going to think of for a poor Christmas.
Yeah. I actually did not know that there even was a Charlie Brown Thanksgiving special until a handful of years ago. So, this one, another interesting thing. So I looked up, some interesting facts about this, because we could sit here and go on a religious diatribe about this, and hold your horses, because I'm probably going to go there. But I was, like you said, right, 60s. We look at this and it's almost like cliche in some ways to say the things about this movie and all of that. But every cliche has to start someplace. This was actually unique for the time because there was no laugh track in this cartoon. Usually kids cartoons at this point in time had a laugh track associated with them, but apparently this
Schultz
one was
rejected it. He flat out said no. Yeah. They wanted one. He told them no.
Yeah, I don't know what this would be like. I almost feel like it would take away from the authenticity of the story to have a canned laugh track in there.
Yeah, it really would, because for as humorous as it is, it's very serious. Like, Charlie Brown's really depressed at the start of this movie, or if you can call it a movie. At the start of it, he's like depressed. He's like, he doesn't know what the whole reason for Christmas is. He even goes and sarcastically thanks somebody for a Christmas card just to be told, I didn't send you one.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, he's seriously depressed. Any kind of laugh track would have really lessened that effect.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially when, like, when you look at the modern day and the folks that, like, it almost, looking ahead in the future, this movie is almost like an omen for what would be to come, because now Christmas, the Christmas season starts on November 1st, and, is what it is as far as like the commercialization and all of that. But this has almost become like an anthem of sorts for folks that just, I don't know, either reject or just don't really vibe with the whole cultural Christmas thing and are looking for, like, what is even the point of the season in the first place?
Yeah, I mean, I think at one point, Charlie Brown's like, why would I have a holiday to just remind me that nobody loves me?
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, I can see how a lot of people are going to respond that way, especially if people are in the darkest days of the year. Like, literally, the days are short, and that's a time of high depression, a time where people are already very, very down, very depressed. They're really going to feel more rejected when they're seeing everybody around them act super happy.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, and I think part of what makes this movie so legendary is the fact that it doesn't pull its punches, even for the time. Like, I think it's easy to paint the past with broad strokes, like, oh, nobody talked about mental health back then, or, oh, everybody had the white picket fence life back then, and it was, culturally normative to have a Christian household back then, and all of these things that we kind of look back to a time like the 60s and say, like, these were the cultural ways. But this movie, even for its time, was controversial for calling out the economics of Christmas and thrusting forward this Bible-centric perspective on the meaning of Christmas. And I think there is something to be said for, like I said at the top of this thing, I was a Rankin Bass kid. I enjoyed like the bright, flashy, Frosty the Snowman of it all, and all of that. I think there's a spot for that in the full view of Christmas movie nostalgia. But this has its own lane because, like you said, Charlie Brown is expressing, like, real emotion And that's before even getting into any of the other 52 different flavors that it can look like when you're talking about somebody processing the weight of this season.
Yeah, and it's throughout the majority. I think it's like the first 2/3 before they get to the end of the play. He's like, I just have not found the real reason for this holiday.
Yeah.
And that's when Schultz actually, he wasn't going to falter on it. He was going to have Linus come out and quote Luke chapter 2 and tell him exactly why there is this holiday.
Yeah. Yeah, that was that they did not want to run the speech, and he did not falter. And that, to me, I remember. So the first time I watched this with adult eyes, it was after having become a Christian. It was actually the first year that we started systematic ecology, and another one of the OGs, Brandon Knight, he and I were talking about, okay, so what are we going to be doing for Christmas? And he's the one who pitched the Charlie Brown Christmas special. And I remember like that I had seen it back in the day, but I'm like, you know what, this is a good time, you know, a good excuse to go back and watch this movie and all of that. And I had remembered that there were religious tones to it, but I didn't necessarily remember how it all played out. And I remember I'm a guy that does like 3 or 4 different things at a time at any given time. Mm-hmm. I'm generally like fidgeting on my phone or on my computer watching something or something like that. Linus takes the stage, drops that blanket, and just starts reciting Luke 2. I stopped what I was doing, and it had my complete and total undivided attention because it looked dead down the center of the lens and didn't back down from saying, okay, you want to know what the point of the season is. You've been exploring the point of the season. Is it, you know, the decorations? Is it gifts? Is it all of this stuff? Nope. Here it is. I'm just going to hand it to you, to the point where I actually co-opted the idea of this Christmas special and turned it into a yearly tradition over on my podcast, where I do a Christmas sermon centered around the Charlie Brown Christmas special. It just was so mind-blowing to me because this is cable television. This is like, or network television rather. This is not a Christian program. This was out for everybody to see.
Yeah. And it was also very surprising because everything stops when he starts his speech. When he starts reciting the scripture, like, it's an abrupt, everything gets quiet. Like, yeah. I'm not the biggest Peanuts fans, but I never get super religious, like, vibes from his comic or from the shows that I've watched. But then it's a very stark and very intentional thing that he did here. Yeah.
Yeah. I think for me, what stood out was like you said, there's mixed messages as far as like how religious Schultz was and all of that sort of stuff. Depends on who you ask or what you're reading or whatever. But he, to me, reads more satire forward than like moralistic or religious forward. And so this message almost rides on the back of his satire up until this point, that tongue-in-cheek sort of ribbing sense of humor that he had, where he was calling all of these things out without simply calling all of these things out until like you said, there's almost like this record scratch moment where everything else dies down and it just plainly states for everybody to hear, this is what we are here for. This is the message that we're looking to convey.
And that is the climax of the movie. Everything starts looking up from there. I remember watching it earlier. After this point, the show doesn't end at this point, which is where I remember it ending, looking back at it. And then when I rewatch it, that's where they find his Christmas tree. They take everything off of Snoopy's house and they put it on the tree. And this small, pitiful tree becomes a full Christmas tree at this point. It's like a magical thing. Don't know how they did this, but what was something small has become something big.
Yeah. Yeah. When I first got saved and I started dating my wife and the whole nine, I was still like, it wasn't like this thing switched in my brain. I'm still not like overly like a Christmas season kind of guy, which is really half of the entertainment for me, that I'm so into this and that I'm here talking about this and all of that. So I tried to pitch my wife on, like, after having watched this, I was like, okay, so here it is. You know, let's get a Christmas tree like that. Like, this is 100% my speed. I am down for getting like this small minimalist Christmas tree. It's almost like being the hipster of Christmas. You don't, you know, you still get your Christmas tree, but it's like a statement of not having like a fully Christmas tree. We did not end up doing that, for the record. I did not end up winning that one, but you know, I tried.
Wisdom prevailed.
Yeah. So yeah, to me, and it's funny that you bring up the ending, because it feels like that should be the ending. It feels like that's like the big crescendo of the special, but then it does come forward into like decorating and then the togetherness and all of that sort of jazz, where then you kind of have that more standard feel good ending to a Christmas special that's more in line with what you would think of out of like the rest of the pantheon of specials that this sits among.
Mm-hmm. And honestly, like, from a Christian perspective, that does make sense, because without Christ in our life, there's nothing that's going to bring us joy. There's nothing in our life that'll give it that good purpose and that good joy, much less in Christmas time. So where Christ comes and he becomes the central focal point of this special, then it becomes happier for Charlie Brown, in the same way that when Christ comes into our life, just the same way he stepped onto the stage on that night 2,000 years ago, there is joy. Yeah. And it does bring us to life, where we were kind of dead, dying, depressed before.
Yeah. I would be interested to know what the response was from adults even back then, because like the trope is that nowadays we are far more in tune with our mental health, right? And so it's you know, a lot easier to get on a podcast now and say like, yeah, I 100%, like, the entire premise of my ministry this entire Christmas season has been reimagining and refocusing on Advent, on the actual like significance of the season, and reframing away from the just one single solitary day that we focus on as the crescendo of the season, but that this is a signpost for the rest of our lives in the current state that we get to live in and all of this sort of stuff. But back then, I'm wondering how this is received. Like, from a rating standpoint, it finished second for the night, right? But I'm wondering if that same pull was felt back then of feeling exhausted by the idea of the Christmas season and needing something that just shoots straight to, okay, worst kept secret in Christianity, Jesus wasn't born on December 25th. However, if you've ever, you know, lived away from your family, right? Maybe you don't, maybe you celebrate a birthday or a holiday or a special occasion, not on the day proper, but when you can get together and stuff like that. So we as Christians still pick this time to celebrate the significance of the promise being fulfilled, the fact that Jesus entered our world so that way we may enter his. And I'm wondering if that hit the same back then, or what that would look like, what the 1960s version of that looks like. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And honestly, like, there's not a full portrayal of the gospel in this episode. It really is. He quotes the scripture about the proclamation that a child has been born.
Yeah.
And that's just the beginning. And that, for us as Christians, that it really is a great beginning. And that's enough for us as Christians to understand. But for a world of people who were seeing this for the first time, who didn't quite understand all of the implications of that quote and what it really means, I'm not sure how much they would have really taken it in. But for those of them who were Christians, that became a very good teaching point for their kids, because one thing that we do forget a lot is how much media, even in very small instances, can affect how you think about things.
Oh, yeah, for sure. For sure. And, you know, it's interesting to think, because how much of it is blinded by the fact that, like, oh, okay, December 25, and you're hearing a baby was born. Oh, even before I was a Christian, like, oh, okay, that's when the Christians talk about Jesus, is December 25th, and all of that sort of jazz. But you're right that with this going out on television, such a wide net was cast, that you have to reckon that this is also hitting homes that might not necessarily know, like, what's being said there, like what exactly, you know, even if they know that the insinuation is Jesus, that they don't know that dude's getting on the stage and directly quoting a section of scripture. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And a lot of people probably didn't. And I would hope that a lot of people saw it, understood something's going on here, and started asking questions. That probably did happen in at least some instances. But I think more of what happened is you just have a lot of parents looking at their kids and saying, that is the most important thing right now.
Yeah. 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 It's a beautiful thing when you have moments like that. Like, yes, it can get a little weird to really drive the religious angle when talking about Christmas, especially around Christmas, because there's so many, like, there's Christmas plays that oftentimes are theological dumpster fires, and there's all kinds of different spins on the story and different things like that, and it can get admittedly nauseating, because it all kind of crescendos around this one specific day. But I think that's the power here. I think that's exactly the weight and magnitude of why this sets apart, at least for me, because I like to think of myself as somebody, because I wasn't born within the system. I wasn't raised in a Christian household. I didn't have church shoved down my throat from a very young age. I lived much more of my life away from God than with God, that I'm still very honest about the realities of life. Yes, I have my faith. Yes, I have this thing, and I teach other people to follow in the ways of Jesus and all of this sort of stuff, but it doesn't stop real life from happening. And so the fact that it's honest about real life and then shares the message, but not in a way that makes it just about December 25th, but makes it about the season, to me is a chef's kiss. Like, this is a fantastic example of how to give a Reader's Digest version of that juxtaposition between what a lot of folks feel around the holidays, and especially coming out of a kid's mouth. I think that's the other part of this is, most of these kids that are in the cartoon world are being voiced by kids in the real world. And so there's that added layer of these are kids that are expressing these truths, you know?
Absolutely. And there's a part of me that also kind of identifies a bit with Charlie Brown trying to deal with the Christmas production or play. I don't remember what exactly they called it. But if you've tried to organize anything at this time of year with all the stuff that is going on, logistically, it is a nightmare. It is so hard, and it is so easy to get burned out because you are constantly going from one thing to another, to another, to another. And then all of a sudden you might have to go get a Christmas tree the night of the production, and you could be burned out. And at some points you might not care. And at other points you might be like Charlie Brown is like, I'm so tired of all this other stuff. We're taking this tree. This tree is different.
Yeah. Yeah. It's that is funny. One of the things that I thought was interesting when I looked at the facts about this is from a production standpoint, from a media production standpoint, I saw that that they were only given 76 grand to make this movie. And yes, it's only a half hour long, but it's half hour of animation. And even in the 60s, you talk about a shoestring budget, even for the time, that was wild to me. Like, I could not, like, when you think of the voice actors, the composers, the animation, and all of it, like that, to see what we actually got as the end result for just 76 grand was ridiculous to me.
I will say, though, 76 grand in 69, according to the inflation calculator, is about 600,000 in today's dollars. So it's not a lot of money, but it's also a bit more than it sounds like at the very first. And they did only do a half an hour.
Yeah, it is. You are correct when adjusting for inflation. It's not like, you know, if you are a film buff, you know, you hear some of these productions coming out just a decade later of like Halloween and stuff like that, where like John Carpenter scraped together pennies and called in favors to get this movie made. So like definitely not the lowest that I've heard, but the quality, I think, for me is what really sets it apart. That like not only did we get something, but we got this as the end result. And
I will say that the animation, while it shows its age, mostly because it doesn't have the same like definition as today, it's still very good. It's still very smooth, a little bit blurry in some places, but still very good. Still very pleasing to the eye.
Yeah. I thought that was one of the things that stood out to me was like, I was expecting to see something that was scratchy and grainy and all of that. But yeah, no, it's pretty well put together and stands the test of time. One of the other things that stood out to me when watching it was the soundtrack. And it's funny to me how outspoken Schultz was against the use of jazz music in his productions. But now you think of Charlie Brown, and because of the Christmas special, if you listen to like any like Christmas radio or whatever, usually you're gonna hear the Peanuts theme because of this. And there are whole jazz pieces from this movie that just, it's funny to me that for somebody that didn't like jazz, it became so synonymous with this.
It does tend to happen that way, doesn't it?
Yeah. So yeah, for me, I would definitely call this easily one of my top three, I think. Definitely top five. If I'm forced, I'd probably put it top three. That's kind of rarefied air for me as far as Christmas movies. How about you?
I'd say it's pretty far up there. I'm not the biggest fan of Christmas movies as a genre. So I probably don't have like a top 10 ranking for Christmas movies, but it is a very good, very well put together production. It's definitely going to be up in that like top quarter of like animations that I like.
Yeah, for sure. Well, folks, let us know what you think of this, and if you are looking for more out of Systematic Geekology and the rest of the Anazao Ministry Network podcasts, you can look them up on Facebook. You can go wherever you find podcasts and look up Systematic Geekology and listen to more. If you're looking for more Christmas content, if you head over to Some Joyful Noise, which is the music podcast put on by the network, you can listen to Evan and I go on about metal Christmas music. So if that's your bag, definitely go ahead and listen to that as well. So what Christmas recommendations would you have for folks? And if not Christmas, what recommendations would you have for folks to check out as we close out?
I'm going to say, if you haven't watched it recently, go ahead and watch the Charlie Brown Christmas special. It's really good. It's really short. It's not going to take too much of your time. It's great to be around. It's great if you're watching around kids. It's good for being around adults. It's good for every audience.
Yeah, for sure. I would also recommend that. And if you are looking for more Christmas goodness, then go ahead and do yourself the favor and watch the quintessential Hallmark Christmas movie, Die Hard. Thank me later. Remember, folks, that we are all a chosen people, a geekdom of priests. Merry Christmas, y'all.